So I was making some notes before, and I hate to start because I hate people who do this sort of thing. If you're a follower of sports, as the Americans would call it, like you are and like I am, if you've just been through a semi-traumatic experience, the last thing you want is somebody to make light of it by kind of going, oh, well. And I wrote a question down, like, are you slightly relieved to not have to be going to America this summer? But it's such a
Oh, it's a tough one, isn't
frivolous
it?
question. I decided
It's a
not to
tough
ask it,
one.
but
I
here it is
think
anyway.
I think I'd decided that I wouldn't go anyway, considering I was lucky enough. I mean, I went to Qatar, and that was questionable enough. So I've done, the World Cup is going to bad places at the moment. So
Yeah.
yeah, Thursday was just a shame from the point of view of we could have won it. That was the deal, really. We should have, we could have. And yeah, I mean, there is some kind of relief that things become slightly less complicated as a result of that. But it was still pretty devastating on Friday for sure, because we were the better team, and fair play to Bosnia, they did what they had to do, but they didn't really offer much.
There's no such thing. I've always thought this. There's no such thing as silver linings when it comes to football or any sport, that you follow that's in your blood. Do you know what I mean? There's no like, yeah, but at least on the plus side. If ever I'm with a group of people in the pub and one of the lads is like, yeah, but you just want to glass them, really, don't you? You're just like, no, let me wallow in my misery for at least for one night.
Yeah, and football fans are amazing at wallowing in a certain way. But what's also incredible, what struck me was the reaction, of the players. Bless them, instantly, like, oh well, we've got a Nations League coming up now. Heads up, got a home Euros coming now. Literally within like pitch side interviews after the game,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh, don't those guys deserve to, just feel pissed off for a while?
Well,
It's
it is, isn't
incredible
it?
the reaction on it.
There's an element, yeah, the modern professionalism.
Mm,
That
yeah.
kind of attitude is like, oh, the wallowing is for the fans. We've got a job to do, which you can understand, can't you? But at the same time, you want
Yeah,
to
completely.
have
But
that.
then you feel like they don't, I mean, obviously they're pros, they're incredible. They've been playing, meaningful football since they were like 12 or something. But you feel they don't get the elation then of, actually winning, or the sadness of not. But I guess, that's how they have to deal with it. Otherwise you'd go mad, or, your form would lose and all of that. So I think it's for us fans to have the ups and downs, and the players are
I
just absolute pros.
You're right, though. I do feel sorry for players now. I'll never forget. I remember it so well when Liverpool won the Champions League that famous final in 2005, and that year they'd finished, I think, or were looking to finish fifth or sixth in the league, so they wouldn't have qualified for the Champions League the next season. And a reporter for whichever channel I was watching it on went up to Stevie Gerrard on the pitch after he just won the Champions League, and her first question was, so do you think that you should be allowed to... That's it, because there was a big debate at the time about whether the winners of the Champions League would always automatically qualify the following year. And she asked him whether he was happy now because there was a good chance he'd get to qualify for the Champions League next year. I thought, he just won this 5 minutes ago. Could you not allow him? And also, what is the point in winning it if you only win it to be in it the following year? That's some
Yeah,
kind of
exactly.
Borgesian nightmare you're entering there, isn't it? This
Yeah.
spiral of insanity.
Yeah, no, exactly. If exactly, just enjoy the winning or wallow in the losing. But yeah, it's
Were
that's
you?
for us, not the players, I guess.
What is your position with the Barry Horns nowadays? Are you still, because obviously you were there with them for the last World Cup?
Um,
Were you discussing going over to America up until quite recently as a
well,
supportive unit?
we don't know really. As I mean, from a personal point of view, since Qatar and the last campaign in the Nations, this campaign I haven't actually played that much with them because I've been going to the games with my son, who's a bit older now.
Hmm.
And we buy tickets, and I used to buy tickets just to have one with him, and he'd go maybe with my friends, and I'd go with the Barry Horns. But tickets have become a bit more expensive now. So if I'm buying two seats next to each other, I'm slightly more inclined to go with him and to experience it with him, because he's at that age now. He's 15, and he's not going to be around at that age for forever in that sense. So for this last campaign, the home games, I've actually just gone as a punter rather than with the Barry Horns, you know. So whether, yeah, who knows with what would have happened? I mean, I think it solves a lot of problems, like you say, having lost that playoff. But the other thing, you know, on top of all of that is, you know, with the Qatar, with the World Cup, again, it was through a playoff. So it
Mm.
was very last minute where, you know, the Welsh government and everybody got involved in, you know, trying to promote Wales. How are you going to do this? Everybody jumps in and having, you know, how are we going to best promote Wales abroad? So these kind of last minute playoffs are actually a nightmare for planning and for making the
Mm.
best use of that kind of stuff. So, yeah, you know, we don't have to go through all of that again this time, which is obviously a sad thing for the football fans, but logistically, it makes life much easier for many of us, I think.
How was I've never seen anywhere sort of really written out the story of the Barry Horns. I'm not pitching a biography here, by the way, but but it's such a you know, you guys became such an interesting cultural marker of almost like not just part of the branding of the football team and wherever it went, but almost like a kind of exclamation point in Welsh identity through there's a connective point between the fans, you, and what was happening on the pitch, rather than you were like an outlier, a bit of a a noise in the corner. You became this kind of conduit for something or other. I don't know. Somebody really needs to explore that in a kind of intellectual sense, I think, and come out the other end.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I personally, I joined later, so you know, with
Hmm.
Euros was like a massive event for all Welsh football fans and the Barry Horns in particular. So I joined just after the Euros. So when they then started qualifying for or trying to qualify for the next World Cup, that's when I started playing with them. But you know, getting to the Euros and the Euros itself was obviously a massive event, and that's where that blend happened between, you know, the players, the fans, and then the Barry Horns are like all a part of the same
Mm.
kind of movement towards something, like you say. The Barry Horns itself started, I think, about 2010, when, you know, Welsh football was at a really low ebb and there was just nonsense and there wasn't much of a vibe at all. So a couple of the guys just said, well, you know, we need to just forget our, you know, the club allegiances and just get together and just, you know, just try and create an atmosphere. So that's where it all started from, if you like, was from like a pretty low point. And yeah, you know, it's a, you know, it was a fan band. It was just something that happened in the terraces in that sense, and it really captured something. You know, as the country, as the team got better, they were just there at the right time then, weren't they? You know, and there's, you know, there's
Yeah.
quite a bit of humour and with the choice of songs and with those chants that hasn't really been replaced. You know, there hasn't been managed to. You can't really recreate that. You know, and it
Yeah.
was so specific to that team and those players. You know, Chris Gunter and Hal Robson-Kanu, and you know, it was very much attached to that team, I think. So then you carry on. Um, and you know, it definitely helps. You know, then there was this creation of the Wal Goch, the Red Wall, and you know, this presence kind of thing. And you know, the Barry Horns is a big brick in the Red Wall. You know, all of that. But yeah, it's kind of, it changes, doesn't it? The team changes, the atmosphere changes. You know, the people who are really sort of hardcore. You know, that it's like, what is it? 10. You know, the Euros is 10 years ago by now. So the nature of the Red Wall has changed. You know, there's far, you know, kids who are in the Red Wall now were, you know, I don't know, 6 or something when the Euros happened. You know,
Yeah.
so the whole thing has changed. So you can't really recreate something that just happened. It was a very organic. You know, I think that's kind of a
Yeah.
key. It
Yeah.
was an organic thing, and you can't put that in a jar. You can't put your finger on that and say, let's do that again. It just
Although
happened.
I'm amazed nobody has though. I mean, I'm amazed there's not some minister for culture and sport who's gone, well, we should probably outsource this to some London company and get some trombone players up from North
Yeah,
London to
well,
come and be the national. That's
yeah,
how
well, I
things
think that,
normally work, isn't
you
it?
know, that kind of thing has potentially been happening behind the scenes. You know, I'm not quite sure, but you know, there has been that kind of ownership trying to, you know, define an experience kind of thing. You know, and yeah, you know, it has to be organic, and you know, if there's a shelf life to that, so be it, in a sense, you know. But yeah, you just carry on, and you just do it, and then sometimes like, oh, well, is this getting a bit stale now? Well, who knows really? But
Yeah.
when if the Barry horns aren't there, it is noticeable because there is less chanting and that kind of stuff as well. So it does create, but it has to be a two-way thing or even three-way thing. It has to
Yeah.
work. It has to work, but yeah, it's a kind of a difficult thing also because the team itself at the moment is in a kind of a difficult place. But 10 years ago, you were riding the wave. It was just something. It was new for everybody, and the team was obviously doing an incredible things. So there was that massive wave of let's try and do it. Whereas now it's happened once, so you're trying to
Hmm.
recreate it, and so you're trying to recreate the feeling of getting to somewhere, but also recreating the feeling of that atmosphere. So it's that it's yeah, it's very hard to recreate something that's so organic. And instantly then you're in danger of sort of destroying it by trying too hard, and.
Wales Arts Review is back, and it's a podcast. Or rather, the new Wales Arts Review is being built before your very eyes around the central column of my conversations with some of the most interesting and vital cultural figures working today. But for us to survive and grow this time, we very much need your help. If you like what we're doing, like what we stand for, then like our posts, and most importantly, subscribe. The more subscribers to our Substack newsletter and YouTube channel, the better placed we will be to grow and pay writers to tackle the most pressing cultural subjects of the day. Via Substack, you can become a paid subscriber and gain access to exclusive content and an ever-growing Wales Arts Review archive. And by hitting the subscribe button on our YouTube channel, not only do you let the platform know you'd like to see more of our stuff, but you increase the chances of us drawing down revenue from ads. All that goes back into Wales Arts Review to help us grow and improve. We need your support. Press those buttons and then go and enjoy our stuff. It's all for you anyway. And things like, just when you were saying then it's 10 years since the Euros, of course it is, but things just seem to move. Time seems so much different when it comes to sport. I don't know what it is. Like, I was watching some YouTube clips the other day of I can't remember what it was, but it was like 10 best goals of 1992 or something, the whatever year the Premier League started. And I was just thinking, I remember all these goals. I remember these players. I remember them like they were yesterday. And yeah, I think, God, I was 12, 13 when this happened. That is a long, long time ago. One of the only other places that happens, of course, is when you start talking about when albums came out and you realize that, that, Radiohead's first album is like 35 years old or something. And and you start thinking, I remember being sat smoking cigarettes on my mate's bed, about 5 of us listening to Definitely Maybe when we were about 15. And now it's like, my God, where did time is different depending on what sort of cultural meter you're using, I think.
Yeah, and where you are, like you say, yeah, so what is it? It's been 30 years since, the release of Snoop Dogg, Doggy Style and stuff. Well, I was listening to that in university.
Yeah.
And, then I like think back, well, when I was born, in some mid-70s, well, 30 years before that, Miles hadn't even recorded Kind of Blue. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh my God, you're back almost pre-bebop, only 30 years, and 30 years now is nothing. Like you say, I remember it
Yeah.
completely vividly, in a lot of this stuff. So yeah, time really, in regards to music, I find it incredible, the difference, looking back, like you say, 20, 30 years ago feels very present to me. But 20, 30 years ago from when I came to this world, it was like, you
Oh, the
prehistoric in my
the
mind.
the first time a mate of mine told me, this wasn't that long, a couple of years ago maybe, when he said, "Do you know we're now currently further away from the release of Definitely Maybe than we were from Sergeant Pepper when Definitely Maybe came out?"
Yeah, exactly. Those kind of things.
And
Yeah.
like, I didn't need to know that. Thanks. I
No,
could that's
no.
a
Yeah.
piece of information I could have done without.
Yeah, and that whole stuff, as a child of the mid-70s, I mean, fine, I wasn't really aware until the early 80s, say, but the 70s was incredibly near all that stuff that I think of as the 60s, which is a long time ago. it was 6 years, Bitches Brew came out 5 years before I was born, or that kind of stuff, the whole fusion thing with that in my head, that's, such a long time before that, but it
Yeah.
just wasn't, it's, phenomenal, yeah.
It's interesting from that perspective as well, listening to what really hasn't dated. And what I was having a conversation in this shop with a customer very recently about Dummy, the first Portishead album. That
Mhm,
sells really
mm,
well for us. Kind of keep the copies in the shop. And I think it's because even though it came out in, what, like 94 or whatever, it's such a singular sound. It doesn't sound,
mm,
it could be, it's completely timeless. And there are quite a few I mean, you mentioned Bitches Brew. Something came up on my timeline recently of the live Bitches Brew. Is it the Isle of Wight gig? Was it?
yeah,
That was the Bitches Brew tour that came out I think you can get on CD now and Blu-ray or whatever. Um, and how just impactful that was, what that sounded like to me 2 days ago on
yeah,
Instagram or YouTube,
yeah.
whatever it was probably as mind blowing to me as it was to people sat in that audience in 1969.
Yeah, 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 exactly. So what makes some music have that and others doesn't, isn't it? Because yeah, Portishead Dummy, the other one, the Massive Attack that came out was a Mezzanine, the third one.
Yeah,
I still think of that as a new album.
yeah, yeah.
you know, and it's that's not far off 30 years by now, I guess. Um, so yeah, I mean, yeah, but Dummy, the Portishead one is just a definitive kind of sound, isn't it?
Well, nobody tried to copy that, did they? It's weird
No,
for such a great art. Not even Portishead. They didn't go on and
yeah.
they sound quite markedly different. They don't,
Mm.
they're not using those same sounds in the second and third album.
Yeah, no, they created that, and I've gone back lately to Cypress Hill, Black Sunday, and it still sounds amazing,
Yeah, yeah,
and it's of its time, but it transcends that, and it sounds completely fresh. That's very much of its time, but it transcends that. Yeah, it's a great listen. It's like it came out, last week or something.
yeah, yeah, yeah. What
If
what
you,
what were
yeah,
the what were the first those first big records or artists for you growing up? Because obviously you've made a career out. I mean, we'll talk about this a lot more. You've made a career out of as a musician, but not just that. You are you're a musician, but you are very much part of a tradition which is not necessarily part of that Welsh tradition. We will talk about this.
mm,
You draw a lot on Welsh folk and Welsh classical traditions in a lot of your own jazz work, but you do a lot of Miles Davis stuff. You do a lot of
mm.
this placing yourself in that tradition. What was the what were who are those first artists
Yeah, well,
who
I've always
sort of
been
woke up
into.
those important parts of you?
Yeah, just I'm from Aberystwyth, and just being wanting to be a jazz fan in Aberystwyth is itself is its own kind of statement in a way. My brother was into jazz, some of his friends were into jazz, so you're always into that kind of. Yeah, I'm not I'm not going to listen to that. I'm going to listen to this stuff. This is where the good stuff is happening. So for me, it was like I said, before, it's the Blue Note Records things, and I've gone back again lately listening to Lee Morgan. He was a very
Oh,
informative trumpeter because he was really fiery and bluesy, but really, ballsy and a hard bop. So it wasn't esoteric jazz. It wasn't difficult jazz. It was jazz that you could dance to. I mean, not that I danced to it, but it had swing, it had rhythm.
mm,
There was plenty of hooks there for you to listen to and figure out. It didn't matter what was going on harmonically, or you just felt it. You felt it. So that's all. It's always been that's been pretty key. As an info as a beginner in that sense, it's the stuff that you feel that really impacted me for sure. So there was that. There was a trumpeter called Roy Hargrove who died way too soon, about 5 or 6 years ago. He was a few years older than I am. I mean, but I think 5 or 6 years older. So I saw him in Brecon. I mean, Brecon Jazz was happening. So I
yeah,
was
of course.
discovering things in the early 90s, and you had Brecon. So I was seeing these incredible, absolutely unbelievable musicians every summer, just an hour and a half down the road in the middle of mid Wales. It was insane, you know. But I mean, you'd done your research by then, but you had a chance to see these people live, you know. So I saw Roy Hargrove in Brecon in the Guildhall, and I think that must have been maybe 92. And, you know, they just loped on stage, dressed like you know, more like hip hop artists, if you like, just blew the hardest hard bop, you know, modern jazz, and then loped off. And I was like, oh my God, that's what I want to do. You know, that's what I want to be. So that's the experience, you know, when you know, when you see people, or, you know, it was like, God, that's the deal, you know, that's what I'd like to be able to do at that point. Obviously Miles came to Cardiff in 1989, and I came down from Aberystwyth to see him, but I wasn't really into Miles then. I'd have been 14. My brother was into him, and, you know, I knew he was an important figure, but I you know, I didn't know much about him. I hadn't listened much to him then, but seeing him was like that thing of, you know, you had goosebumps. It was just like, wow, you know, the whole St. David's Hall was packed, and just he wasn't on stage long at that gig. You know, he wasn't playing much then, but the band is great. But when he walked on, there was like a frisson, you know. And just to witness that, no, you know, not that you think, oh, I want to be that guy, but just to witness that and the power of his sound and the musical, you know, those kind of things are pretty. Well, they never leave you. You know, I remember that now, you know. So yeah, Lee Morgan and Roy were the trumpeters when I was young. There was a Cuban guy called Arturo Sandoval who could go really high and play really loud, really fast, you know. Well, I mean, I was a kid, so I was into all that stuff. I'm not just now, but, you know, incredible.
Fast. Of course.
Yeah, amazing pyrotechnics, you know, music as gymnastics. You know, Arturo's your guy. He can really play higher than anybody else, faster than anybody else, you know. So he was great, and that was good fun. But then at the same time, then I started to get into hip hop, partly because I felt I kind of wanted to, and partly because I saw a couple of films. I mean, Boys in the Hood made quite a big impression on me, and then Juice, the film, came out, and they had great soundtracks. So through these soundtracks, then I discovered different things. There was a real movement then to mix jazz and hip hop, you know, which is kind of still going on now. You know, it's never really settled, and for me, it's never really got much better than some of the stuff that was happening then. It's more integrated now. It's more natural by now. You know, everybody plays hip hop beats all the time. You know, it's not a let's get the jazz guys with the hip hop guys anymore. By now, all the jazz guys are thoroughly versed in hip hop, so it's just in everything. You know, it's there all the time. Yeah. Whereas back in the 90s, it was let's get these guys in with these guys. So, you know, Gangsta. I've got really back into Gangsta lately, and the Jazzmatazz album. There was a guy called Greg Osby, a saxophonist who was a proper jazz head, but he did an album called 3D Lifestyles with rappers. I've heard that being dissed a lot, but I think it's a great album. It's one of the best jazz hip hop crossovers, because he comes from the perspective of jazz rather than from the perspective of hip hop. So there's plenty of playing. So, you know, so that was great. So yeah, so I deliberately got into hip hop in a sense. Ice Cube then was a massive figure, partly because of Boys in the Hood, and then, you know, his America's Most Wanted and The Predator. The Predator was a big album for me. I thought that was incredible. And then Cypress Hill, when I went to university, then you sort of discovered, you know, all of that that scene. So Cypress Hill, and well, yeah, you know, there was a lot of that stuff going around, and so I was always into that. I was, yeah, you know, you could almost say more a bit contrary. I would always go for the slightly less well-known stuff. You know, if everybody was listening to Red Hot Chili Peppers, I'd listen to Cypress Hill or something, or, you know.
Yeah.
But I was very much into the West Coast thing, which is kind of funny, which is kind of shows my lack of information, knowledge, partly because, you know, all of that Nas stuff and all the other guys from the East, I would have really been into. I didn't really hear that until much, much later. But no,
why do you think that was that? Because that's not, you know, that we, by that point we were in, you know, by the 90s we were in the time where most people could access whatever music they wanted to. There was enough specialist radio around, specialist magazines. You
Mm.
could, it wasn't like in the '60s where you could only get what came off the boats or whatever. It was
No,
why what drew you to the West rather than the East?
yeah, I think it was the sound, that G funk sound, that bass line, and the drawls of Snoop Dogg. Or I mean, the lyrics are terrible, and I genuinely don't really listen to many of the lyrics. In that, which is mad when you're talking about hip hop. But it was just the groove, the beat,
Yeah,
the bass lines of G funk, how it sounded. And then there was, there were sort of satellite bands for Ice Cube. There was a band called the Lynch Mob, which were great. And then I found this guy called Cam, and nobody had really talked about him. And that's an album called Never Again. And he was one of the Fruit of Islam, so he was kind of attached to the Nation of Islam. And I was kind of into that thing of thinking that they had every right to be kind of militant, and I was into that kind of militant identity. Which isn't really a part of the West Coast thing, really, was it? Because the West Coast thing is just about, extreme capitalism, extreme materialism in many ways, But I don't think I discovered the East Coast things purely because nobody showed me, I mean, I didn't find it, and I didn't have any friends who were like, well, no, check this out, which has come much later. So I was into the Wu-Tang and that stuff, but I mean, that kind of made me feel a bit afraid or something. I found the Wu-Tang incredibly sinister, It wasn't like easy
yeah,
listening. It wasn't like putting on, The Chronic or something. It was a whole different headspace, which I don't think I was ready to get into at that point. Whereas Gangsta, I could deal with. I could deal with Gangsta, and they're obviously East Coast. So I think I must have been looking for the jazz thing.
yeah,
And with the
yeah. Yeah,
with the West Coast stuff, you had that very obvious G funk. I was really into the funkadelic samples and the P funk samples, that kind of stuff.
yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I was thinking as you were saying then that of course for a lot of black musicians of that era, jazz musicians, Miles being the most famous one, who would never refer to jazz music. He called it black classical, didn't he? Black
Mm.
classical music. And it's interesting if you think of the dynamic, I suppose, between what you would call black classical musicians and then the new guys who are like the young hip hop artists, and that's an interesting dynamic rather than just grooves meeting in the middle. There's hip hop artists drawing on their forefathers in a way who happen to be still around.
Yeah, well, and quite literally, in the case of Nas, his dad is Olu Dara, who's a great cornet player. He's on great late 70s sort of avant-garde records, So his dad was literally a jazz guy. So and then there is that crossover. That's always been in the end. That's become far more prevalent now, like I was saying, and I think that's a great thing. I went to see DJ Premier. He was over in Bristol back in November. And it was amazing to see him. It was a bit like seeing a jazz god. He was just there on the wheels of steel doing his thing. But listening to the music coming from him really made me realize how completely natural it is that all these musicians are into hip hop. You don't have to want to. You don't have to play hip hop to be into hip hop in that sense. And there's so many great. African American jazz guys now who are so thoroughly versed in hip hop. It's just natural to them, but they play burning jazz. But, all the reference points is everything in the jazz canon, plus everything in the hip hop canon, plus potentially everything in the soul stacks Motown canon. It's just, there's just this endless information now that somehow seeps through into what they do. And that's just phenomenal. It's amazing. There's a trumpeter called Ambrose Akinmuziri he's just way ahead of so many other things. But he's done 2 albums now where it's like trumpet, a rapper, and then like a keyboard or a bass, drums, and a string quartet. And he brings them all together, and it works perfectly. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's absolutely the statement is just incredible. But it works because he's versed in all of these things. So for him, it's a completely natural amalgamation. For some people, they're like, oh, that's insane, But I think, from the life he's led, I could presume, or the music he's heard, putting these things together is natural. And that's what I'm really into at the moment, I think, is that idea of if you've heard it and if you're into it, there's it becomes thoroughly doable or natural in that sense. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it does. It's interesting talking about that kind of the language that the language of the artist that is something that comes from what is just innate to them. All of these cultural influences, um, Kamasi Washington stuff, which is, I mean, you listen to the last. I'm terrible with names of albums, of new albums, but the last album he did, because he just had a soundtrack out, right? Which is
Mm,
some manga thing he just did, which was
yeah.
absolutely brilliant. But then the album before that, which there's some space jazz on there that goes into something that then is a little bit Motown, a little bit Broadway, and of
Mm,
course all of this coming out of Juilliard. He teaches at Juilliard, right? He's like, this is all coming from one of the most like respected classical, musical training conservatoires in the world, essentially. And all this stuff, he's clearly got the coolest class in school, right? Everyone wants to be in Kamasi's
Yeah,
class.
well, he toured with Snoop Dogg and all of he's got that
Yeah,
cachet
yeah.
of like doing the hip hop thing. But yeah, he was in Cardiff back in March and I saw him. And when he finished his encore was they played a tune and then they went into the bass line of Nas's New York State of Mind. So that
Right.
was the bass, so it was that meeting of, the highest end, the biggest selling jazz guy in the world at the moment, giving his nod to Nas rather than giving his nod to Sonny Rollins or whatever, and it's
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
really, and it was great. And a lot of, a lot of the audience knew that as well, so, people were aware of that connection, but it's when I heard that, it was like, yeah, these guys, it's just completely natural that they drink from both
Yeah.
wells, they draw their inspiration from both, and I think that's a really great development, but it's happened completely naturally, So this
That's the
idea, like
important
we
thing,
had,
isn't it? That it's
yeah,
natural, that it's not like forced. He's not opening little drawers to go, what shall I take from here? What
mm,
shall I take from here? That
yeah,
that you felt like perhaps a lot of the prog guys in the 70s were doing, sort of picking a bit there, but it's just filtering through naturally from these guys.
yeah, and in the 90s with the jazz hip hop thing, it was there was a jazz hip hop movement. You were branded with that, and then you were kind of stuck with it, or you were the jazz hip hop guys. Whereas by now it's far more fluid than that, I think, and it's far more natural in a way. And but again, hip hop has turned into is hip hop dead? Like, is jazz dead? Who knows? It's turned into this huge beast now, which is just everywhere. So, you can't not be influenced by it because it's just literally everywhere, isn't it?
How much does that kind of attitude or that natural, like, osmotic relationship with uh, cultural benchmarks, I suppose, cultural patterns, how much does that influence the way that you develop your material? And because, you're, as we've just been talking about, hugely influenced by Black American
Mm,
music, and yet your music is often drawing upon Welsh traditions almost through that lens, if you like,
mm.
for want of a better way of doing it. How much does that influence you? That the idea that there are these natural currents that run through you.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think it's exactly that, in the sense of, my influences largely initially certainly was from the Black American music. I can't deny that's what it drew me, and that's what I was really heavily into. And then through that you discovered European jazz, if you like, through ECM, Jan Garbarek, that stuff. But Tomasz Stanko is a great Polish trumpeter who had a massive influence on me, purely because he sounded completely like him, but in a really wide open kind of global, not world music way, but in a really definitive kind of, this is who I am playing jazz from where I'm from kind of way. And then obviously, like you were saying, it's so I was talking, with Daniel, my brother, when we sort of started Birim. It was that thing of, well, why are we playing American music? What can we bring? We're Welsh, so that's where we started the folk tunes thing. But I'd been playing with Fern Hill, a great folk band, for a number of years. and learnt and discovered all this new music that I had, some of it I'd heard. It was in my head somewhere from primary school or whatever, but a lot of these Welsh folk tunes I'd never heard. And they were superb. They were really everything you'd want in that sense, as stuff to work with. Um, so yeah, so that's kind of the crux of it. Was like, well, I'm into my African American music, but I'm a Welsh guy from Aberystwyth, so how can I bring these two things together? So that's when you think of, okay, what's what's my voice going to be? Well, not voice. I wouldn't be that pretentious, but how am I going to bring my experience to the table? So then, from having played so much with Fernhill and learnt these folk tunes, I could bring all these tunes into what would be more jazz contexts. And you realize that actually nobody'd heard these tunes before either, so it was something really kind of new or really fresh. And then I just ran with that. Then you could do a lot of this. So I then did an album with Leo Rhydderch, the triple harp player, who's like, jazz, jazz, kind of Welsh folk royalty, but she's really open-minded. And that was in 2010, and that was quite important for me to think that she was willing to do an album with me, but also just the fact that I could think or say, well, I've now done an album with Leo Rhydderch gave me a kind of a seal of approval almost to carry on doing what I was doing. Even though it's,
But
it's a pretty folky album, that it's just a triple
yeah,
harp
yeah.
bit and there's a bit of drums. So, it's not reimagining the wheel or anything, but she was willing to have me on board, and I was really
Talk a little bit
happy.
about more working with, because as you say, like she's
Mhm.
sort of iconic. She's a folk royalty. Even though, I mean, I know we've talked about this before, but not forgotten, but maybe doesn't get the appreciation that she deserves. Doesn't by which I mean, you know, there's no like 15 disc box set of her
Yeah,
work out there
yeah.
on Deutsche Grammophon or anything, which I think would be deserving, shall we say.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. She deserves that. She's yeah, absolutely. So well, I met her through Fernhill. Kerry Rees Matthews, who's the guitarist and flute player with Fernhill, was her producer for Flach. So she was I think she'd had a number of decades where she hadn't recorded, and then she started recording again then in the early 2000s. And for me, like, I wrote for you for Wales Last Review, the album Enlli is just like a
Yeah.
defining statement of something which is, transcends everything. It's based on the Welsh experience. It's played on a triple harp, but it's a phenomenal statement. So yeah, so just yeah, so it's hard to explain because I've got to know Theo now and I consider her a
Mm.
friend, and she's
Sure,
she's
yeah.
really supportive and she's great. But yeah, everything you say as an artist, she definitely doesn't get the recognition. But then, what is recognition? Almost the cognizant. People know the people who know, and if you don't know, well, that's bad tough luck for you in that sense.
That's a good
Because you
point.
should
Yeah,
know,
that's a good point.
you should
Yeah,
know, people should
yeah.
hear it, and if it's not played on the radio, if it doesn't get that, well, there's only so much you can take on maybe as an individual, or even as somebody like myself, who's a bit of a missionary, if you like, trying to bring people's attention to things. Well, yeah, by now she does get, more attention than she did then, for sure, in the
Yes, certainly when
2000s
you wrote that piece for us on Encli, it was. I mean, you introduced me to that album,
mm.
and made me go off and discover more of her work. Although I was familiar with a few little bits and bobs when you came to us with that piece, but yeah, yeah, definitely. But I wonder if like you say, your missionary work, your championing of her and others was the starting point for maybe some more attention or reevaluation. I think so.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it was a combination of things. I think a few people were discovering her. Then she recorded with Llewen then for Gungan Glan Babel Bidir. She's on that album, which
Mm.
is a great album in its own right. And she got Llewen then did a lot of bigging up of Leo, and I think Llewen has far bigger platform than I do. So I think that would have most probably had quite an effect because yeah, Llewyn is a much more of a popular artist, and a broader spectrum of ears in that sense. So if Leo played on that, and then you've got Kera Savannah's just come through now, and she plays a triple harp on the
Hmm.
bass, and she often refers to Leo, even though Keris is going in a different way, and Leo's very much supportive of that, and I think Keris knows that. I mean, it's I'm not in a position to talk about that really, but yeah, she's a name that gets referred much more now
Mm.
than 20 years ago, which is great,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah,
that's,
yeah.
that's how it should be. That's deserving, but
In
yeah, so
in
yeah.
in that no, in that regard, where do you think you sit in that? Because in terms of playing with bands of Fernhill and stuff in your younger earlier part of your career, you were very much ensconced in the folk scene. But now
Hmm.
you've definitely moved out of the folk scene, even
Hmm.
though a lot of the jazz compositions you create and that music has a root there. You're
Hmm.
often taking, or sometimes anyway, what I see, you take traditional folk ideas or folk motifs or folk
Hmm.
songs even and work with them. But where do you think you sit now? Are you sort of, I mean, knowing not that I'm not saying for a moment this is the case, but knowing that particularly in traditional music, people are very protective of their patches, not in Wales, but famously
Hmm.
all around the world. Are you viewed a
Hmm.
little bit like, the prodigal son, or
Oh no,
the
no. I mean, definitely. I was in,
are you the ex? Do they
yes,
do they go, oh
well, in Wales,
my God,
in
Thomas is at the bar?
yeah, yeah. I was definitely an imposter for sure. But
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But again, I was having a platform by playing with Fernhill, who were again slightly on the side, but were definitely respected as as a proper folk band. Julie's voice and Kerry's arrangements are phenomenal. But I was an imposter there because I was the trumpeter, noodled around in the background, and people would get up and leave our gigs. But I've got no problem with that. If people want to leave, that's you're doing something right potentially. But then we did one album then with Nobster Nuts, the rapper from Swansea. So he joined the band. So then I was like the normal one. If you're at a folk gig and you've got a trumpeter and you've got a rapper, well, it's the rapper that's going to offend people, not the trumpet. You know, so that changed things. So that was a good tour and that was fun. But yeah, regarding the folk thing, that's definitely I don't see myself in the folk scene, and I've never really been. I was playing with Fernhill and I've played with Theo, and that's all great. But
Mhm.
I'm not a guy who would go to sessions. I haven't modeled my. There was a trumpet player up in North Wales called Neil Yates who's kind of worked out a trumpet way of playing like a flute, and he could do all the effects, and he could sit in this session and play these jigs and reels. Well, I was never into that. I was never particularly interested in that or wanted to do that. But the folk thing, in my head is definitely come through as tunes, as melodies, as belonging, as making my music sound potentially Welsh in that sense, whatever that means. But even with the most recent stuff, the Cwmwl Tystio on this project, where I sort of look at Welsh history or Welsh identity and stuff, having Welsh folk tunes in that really brings it into focus. Otherwise, it would just be a bunch of improvising, some crazy stuff, and that's it. Great, but having that Welsh um, tunes in there really makes it mean more somehow. And I really love that idea of putting these folk tunes in contexts where they've maybe never existed before. So having Edith Crawford sing on the second one, we had vocals, so then bringing the Welsh language into it brings it even more into focus in a sense, because I've been playing these tunes and they sound fine, but then when you hear the lyrics, or not necessarily the lyrics, but the sound of the Welsh language, if you don't understand it, that really again puts the music somewhere else then again, and then when you've got, say, Wolfie Robinson or Soweto Kinch wailing over that, it's like, okay, well, what's going on here? We've got some amazing jazz players blowing, but we've got somebody singing in Welsh. What's happening? And that's kind of the point of that, if you like. So the most recent one now, Cwmwl Tystion 3, it's only come out last week or the week before.
Mhm.
There's a bass player from New York who's phenomenal, Melvin Gibbs, a guitarist from France via Vietnam who brings his old Eastern sound. And then you've got Edith and Mared singing in Welsh. And we've got some hymns and we've got some folk tunes. So yeah, so that's a real mega mishmash, if you like. But, my thing then is trying to make it cohesive. It's got to be
Mm.
cohesive and it's got to make sense and it's got to be. So I almost see myself then as a navigator. I plot the map. I plot the routes we're going to go. We start here, we go there, we go down here, we go over there, and whatever happens in the middle is down to the band. But I guess I'm in a position that I'm kind of the only guy who would have put those bands together by now. I'm not sure
Well,
anybody else
I
would do
was
that.
gonna ask you, was it your destiny to be band leader? I mean, even the people you were talking about earlier, like Lee Morgan and Miles,
Mhm.
and these are band leaders, right? These were, they weren't. I mean, Lee Morgan played in a lot of other bands, but by the time, his Sidewinder and Cornbread and those albums come out, I
Mm,
mean, these are guys who put bands together in
mm.
order to get the sound or get the sound they want to discover if they don't know what it's going to sound like. Was that sort of, even as a kid, was that sort of your unspoken destiny? Was it even in Fernhill? Were you like, yeah, one day, once I'm ready?
No, no, no. I think that's happened.
Okay.
It sort of crept up on me, maybe. I was always that kid who wanted to be the captain of the rugby team, but never was. But I never. No,
This is you just getting your own back.
yeah, yeah. So so with time, I think it's just kind of yeah. It's come with definitely maturing, if you like. I mean, well, no, I did. I've always led bands. That is true. I mean, there must be like some sort of inner despot that's desperate to have people do what I want. So even way back, in university, I was playing in funk bands, and I'd be the guy leading it. So
Mm.
I've always maybe enjoyed that thing of getting things together. Maybe the hustle of getting gigs, trying to get things. So yeah, maybe I've always had that. But with the more ambitious stuff, say, with the Cymwl Tystion, I discovered a trumpeter called Wadada Leo Smith, and he had an incredible 4 CD set called 10 Freedom Summers, which expresses the whole African American experience, right from slavery to the present day. So that was like a defining moment, a massively defining moment in the sense of like, wow, how can I do something like that? Obviously it's a completely different experience and I'm not drawing any kind of parallels at all, but it's like, how can I bring that kind of, it had such a it resonated so deeply. It was like, how can I bring some of that power into what I'm doing, And then you have to be the band leader in that sense. If I'm going to want to bring these people together, I've got to be the guy who says, let's bring these people to, let's do it. So yeah, so the side of it then is, like I say, is that I think I'm the only one who would be daft enough, brave enough, depending on what you think, to come to, they were just cold emails. I emailed, it was just coming out of COVID when I emailed Soweto and Orphy. The first one, I deliberately picked only Welsh musicians. So I had Hugh Warren and Roddy Davis on harp and Hugh V. Williams on bass. And that was much more successful, I guess, than I thought it would be in my head. It just worked. And we had live visuals. So there's that deal. So it's a bit more than just a concert, there's visuals as well. So
Well,
because that,
tell us a little bit about, for people who are listening who don't know about the
Mm,
whole Cymwl Tystian thing, which I've been lucky enough through knowing you that I've sort of been following and enjoying
mm,
from the first one, and I've just started making my way through the third album this week. But yeah, tell us a little bit about the whole concept and how it's become a trilogy of albums, really. But
yeah,
saying a trilogy of albums makes it sound not quite as ambitious and broad and
yeah.
far-reaching as it is, really.
Well, yeah, no, but that's kind of that'll be its legacy in that sense. So yeah, like I said, I heard this Wadada Leo Smith album maybe 2014, 15, something like that, and it was just phenomenal. There's also a musician called Matana Roberts, and they had a series called Coin, which again explores their relationship with uh, the predecessors. And again, that's from a very a female perspective, if you like, but it's phenomenal stuff. And she would change the band on every album, so that made me think, okay, maybe I could do something. It doesn't have to be the same sound; it can still be a part of a project. So the first one then was Cwmwl Tystion. It's a biblical line, means cloud of witnesses. So it's a biblical line. I heard Cornel West talk about it in some clip or other, but it's also a line in a poem by Waldo Williams. When he asked, "What is nationalism?" To build a house in a cloud of witnesses. It's an existential poem, and it's superb. It's super heavy. Waldo was a great nationalist pacifist. He's one of the major figures. So I wanted to tie it into Wales by having meaning in the title. So I thought, okay, I can use Waldo as an initial peg. And then the first one, I was just paying tribute to some events in Welsh history, or I was there. So some of the titles are kind of political, if you like. There's Tryweryn, there's the Blue Books, there's about Paul Robeson and the miners' Eisteddfod, and then I wanted to celebrate. There was a few lines then from the poem, like the existential questions. What is man? What am I? That kind of thing. So good/pretentious. You see what just depends how you feel about these things, So we did a tour, like I say, with an all Welsh band, and then the idea then was to have visuals, so pretty abstract visuals. So Simon Prophet does the visuals, and it's great. So he would set microphones up in front of the instruments, and then the visuals would change in relation to the sounds or change colours. So it was interactive and live. So we did that. Was a tour, I think, in 2018, and an album then came out in 2021. Again, I need to thank the Arts Council. I'm on this cycle where you apply for money. Quite often I don't get money for the plans, and fine, whatever. But for this one, I was successful. So that made it happen. I could pay the band what they deserved and made the whole thing happen. Then COVID came, and then during COVID, I was thinking, hang on, I could do another one of these. It was, there's scope here for another one. So I did one called Cwmwl Tystion 2 Riot, and I based that one on riots in Welsh history. So it's the Merthyr Rising. And I also wanted to raise issues then potentially about how we see our own history, how we see ourselves, because the Tredigga riots were potentially anti-Semitic. So I used there's a musician called John Zorn who's done incredible work. He's a New York Jewish guy, and he's got a band called Masada who's really dug deep into the Jewish tradition. So I found a Welsh hymn that was written by its source is it's a Hebrew source in a sense, the melody. So I use that, and then I use some Jewish harmonies in that section, and so I wanted to raise some issues about questioning how we're presented by our own history is presented to us, is what I mean. There's obviously many angles, and then I did a song about the Cardiff race riots where Soweto rapped in that. And again, it was this idea of questioning our definition of Welsh history, if you like, So I was really happy with that one. And there was a tribute to Mahmoud Matan, and that was about the time that the Fortune Man book came out by Nadif Mohammed, and that was just timing in a way. But
just a coincidence.
It's just a coincidence. But I really got into that whole world at that point, and it was phenomenal then to have Edith singing in that, and having the voice in the project really took it somewhere else. And Soweto Kinch is an amazing tenor alto player, but he also raps or spoken word. So I knew I wanted him to rap in the Cardiff race riot section. So then I knew I needed a Welsh vocalist, because I didn't want to put out a project that was monolingual. My experience of Wales isn't monolingual. So it was important to me that then I needed a vocalist that would sing in Welsh as a foil to Soweto's rap. And then obviously there's far more singing than rapping, but that's how it went. And then the most recent one then was 2024 we toured. So the first band was like all Welsh. The second band was Welsh plus Soweto Kinch and Orphy Robinson, two massive British jazz figures. So then I thought, okay, let's open it up. Let's aim for the stars. So I discovered a band called Harriet Tubman, super power trio from New York. Incredibly heavy guys. They're guys in their 60s, and they've played with everybody. Their back catalogue is phenomenal of musicians they've played with. But Melvin Gibbs, the bass player, was really he uses loads of effects, loads of all kind of different grooves, well, not screw, sounds. He's unique, you know, he's completely unique. So I emailed him, you know, "Dear Mr. Gibbs," um, and I was just waiting and waiting for a reply, and then finally I got a reply here, "Yes, I'm in," you know. This,
Oh,
oh my,
wow.
this
Simple as
guy's
that.
like, yeah, you know, it's like, "Will you come and tour Wales? You know, this is my track record. It'll be paid. There'll be this and this. We're gonna do this." And yeah, it's just like a yes, I'm in. And it was like, oh my God, that's, you know, incredible. But I think what helped maybe is that, you know, I wasn't saying I want a bass player. I was saying I want you, you know,
Mm.
I want your sound. I don't care what you do. I want your vibe, everything you bring. And he has a massive interest in identity and the African American experience and Paul Robeson and that kind of thing. So, you know, I was saying this is a political. He did a phenomenal piece. It's on YouTube after the George Floyd, you know, murder in Minneapolis. I think it's called. I can't remember the name now, but it's an incredible. He went to the scene and recorded a video, and it's him on the bass, and there's a rapper called Cockeye, I think. Oh, it's so powerful. It's unbelievable. Yeah. So if anybody's watching this, check that out. It's Melvin Gibbs. It's something like 4+1 or I Can't Breathe or something. But it's
We'll put it in the show notes, as they say in podcast
yeah,
language.
it's really is, you know, really is powerful. So yeah, so I mean, he agreed, which was amazing. And then I was thinking, I just thought, well, okay, well, if I've got this amazing guy, you know, I was then going for the power trio sound, a bit like Harriet Tubman. So I knew I wanted a shredder on guitar, you know, and I'd seen Yen Lay many years ago with different bands, and you know, he always shreds. He's a phenomenal, you know, he's like a fusion prog rocker in a sense, but he's beyond that. He's not a prog rock. He's just a fusion electric guitarist, and he's got this Eastern sound, which again, so he's really into his Vietnamese identity, or you know, this idea of world. Yeah, it was amazing to talk to Nguyen in a way, because you know the relationship between Vietnam and France is very complicated, and his family, and he was talking a lot about that. So he has a much. Yeah, it made me feel a bit of a fool playing with these guys when you were talking about identity, because they've got such a not a deeper understanding, but a much more complex experience of it, if you like, you know. So it was phenomenal to just chat to these guys and, you know,
But
find out how they felt.
it seems to me. I mean, two things are coming to mind. Then that you're going around finding musicians where you're not looking for a bass player, for instance, to go, here's, you know, here's the scales of what I want. This is what I want you to play. You're finding people you like their artistry, you like their voice, you like their sound, you like the way they go about things, and you want their artistry in your project to find out what the project. Obviously, you have a sort of, I want it to sound like him, but you don't know what him in that project is going to sound like, and that you know that is the area of those great band leaders. That's what Miles used to do, going around picking up great musicians. Like Bowie used to do it, you know, just going around picking up, you know, musicians. That's why he'd have like Luther Vandross on backing vocals and then Stevie Ray Vaughan on guitar. It's, but you know, these are, you know, I in that sense, I always think of people like Miles and Bowie in the same sphere, you know, Serge Gainsbourg, people like that, just going around going, I like that, come here. And if we all come together, you create a new sound for me. That's kind of what the position you're in, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just the sound of, yeah, you know, I want to play with you guys. It's like, I want to hear what you'll do, but then also I want to hear you guys with Edith and Mared singing, who are two phenomenal, you know. So I thought I'll have two vocalists this time to really get a different sound again, and almost to make it a bit more folky, where you could have, you know, completely vocal duets where it would be like, you know, complete booty, and then you'd have the contrast of this incredibly distorted bass sounds or guitar shredding, you know, and all of that. So it was all part of that. And yeah, what I often find is I don't really want to play. I'm just listening. You know?
Well, I've seen you. You know, I've seen you on stage a few times, obviously, and of course, there's that sort of tradition. You know, like if you watch, you know, the old jazz players and they do their solo, and then the band leader stands to the side and watches his, his guys do their thing, but you always do that as well. You know, you play your
Mm.
thing and then you stand to the side, you fold your arms, and you're as part of the audience. You just happen
Mm.
to have the best seat in the house, right? Because you're up on the stage.
Completely, and it's like it's unbelievable, and quite a lot of the time it's like, oh God, you know, I don't want to mess this up. I'll just listen. I'm not going to play. I'm not going to stink it out by starting playing. You know, I'll just listen. So that's yeah. So that was yeah. So that was a phenomenal tour. I mean, it's 2024, but it's very fresh in my mind now, purely because the album has just come out, and
Mm.
I'm trying to do promo and trying to get attention to it. So it's you know it's come back to the front of my brain again after 2 years of sort of languishing in the back. And with these things, quite often you feel quite after it. I was spent, you know, I was done, I was empty, I had nothing left. So it's taken quite a while to even think about doing something else. And I don't think that's necessarily a good way of working, but that's kind of the way I've found of doing something. You know, if you go for something big like that, it was like a lot of organization beforehand. It was quite stressful at the time. Not stress, you know, not in a bad way, but just, you know, you just want everything to be okay and to work and to
Mhm.
get everywhere and everything's okay. So after that, yeah, I was just done in. I was done for a while, you know. So
But
we'll
it
see.
feels like it feels like as well. You're talking about, you know, feeling slightly feeling slightly lesser than the guys you got in because of the complexities of their relationships and their journeys to in discovering points of their own identity in terms of their relationship with heritage and nationalities and stuff. But it feels like that what you're doing, particularly in the Cymultustian project, the three projects, that's what you're doing. You are, you know, you're getting this great band together, but you're essentially bringing cultural tools together, artistic tools together, in order for you on a very personal level to have this private dialogue with ideas of your own heritage and your own identity in terms of national, but also, you know, personal, something a little bit more uh, compact than that, perhaps, and something as big and broad and wieldy as a national identity. I mean, you more than ever now, talking to you this last hour, if you know, I'm just getting this feeling which comes to me every now and again that all creative endeavors are the same thing. You know, you're not doing anything different to what a novelist does. You're not doing
Mm,
anything different to what you know, a painter of great landscapes does.
mm,
You're using tools at your disposal. They just happen to be other
mm,
artists, right, to
mm.
come together on a focused project of your own preoccupations with your own identity and your own conversations, you know, with the
Mm.
cosmos. If you were looking for, there you go. There's a pretentious sentence for
There's
you.
a there's a
If you're
stuff
looking
right
for one.
for you. Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, you know, as I mentioned Thomas Stanko, he had a line, you know, I'm a poet. I just happen to play the trumpet. You know, I definitely don't feel that, but yeah, you're right. That thing of, yeah, you're working something out, or, you know, you're having your own dialogues, and you end up doing the stuff you want to do, I think. Or you know, you end up finding a way of making what you want to happen. I mean, managing to get these things off the ground and to make them happen is itself um, a minor achievement, if not a major achievement. You know, so actually getting things to happen makes you feel good about it, and then you have to make it worthwhile. If it's happening, it's got to happen, and it's got to be, you know, it's got to be what it is. I mean, the one thing I haven't mentioned, which is before that, or of course, is Kamira, the band of the Indian guys.
Yeah, I was
That's
going to bring that up. Yeah, yeah.
a massive stepping stone for me and a massive learning curve. And again, that thing of kind of self-confidence, or you know, where you can be Welsh in a thoroughly universal kind of sound, you know, a world sound, and still maintain something of yourself, or of Welshness, whatever, like I say, you know, whatever that is, not meaning that in a flag waving way, but it's Kamira has been really important. And yeah, the irony is Kamira was the band that used to stress me out a lot about arranging, you know, sorting it out, because, you know, you got the three guys in Wales, three guys in India, or like two of those guys now are in America, and you got one in India. So just to get us in the same room is a huge
Yeah,
deal.
I mean, I remember it because I was doing some projects in India around about the same time that
Yeah.
you were doing the second iteration of Chimera, wasn't it? Is that right?
Well, it's always been one iteration, but we've had different tours, and at some point, some of the
Sorry,
guys
the
couldn't
second. Yeah, I
make
meant the
it.
second
You
tour.
know,
Yeah,
so yeah,
yeah,
so
yeah.
we've had different. We're a core band, but initially we said no depths. But at some point, we've had to had them. We had visa problems of coming in and all sorts. You know, so we've been involved in like things which have really made me lose sleep in that sense. But that's all of that's helped towards the Cymultystion thing. I think of just thinking, well, you know, I'll just approach these guys and see what they'll do. You know, if I've looked after guys from India in Britain, in Wales, so therefore if Melvin comes from New York, I think I can look after him, you know, in that sense. So I think all of that has really helped to get these things off the ground, you know. But yeah, that, you know,
The,
musically
the
that's a whole different world as well, you know.
yeah, the Chimera project must have been. I mean, I don't remember if we talked about this before, but to engage with musicians who have a completely different musical language
Mm.
must have been, just on that level, must have been so challenging but enriching as well, to be
Yeah, it's
pushed that far
phenomenal.
outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I wouldn't even say challenging, but immeasurably enriching and beneficial to my musical development and my musical whatever. Just yeah, just to be with these guys and to see how they uh, deal with music or approach music or perceive music or just ooze music. You know, they just have this physicality. It's just in them. You know, and we've had tremendous conversations about the difference between, you know, the Western concept of music and the Indian concept of music, and how Western stuff just doesn't can't actually contain what happens in Indian music, you know. And yeah, it just shows you the limits of Western notation and Western forms of writing, and you know, even how you hear music, you know, the whole idea of the rags and the cycles and time, and yeah, you know, it's just been that's been one of the greatest experiences musically for me, for sure.
Have you taken any of those musical, you know, those broadening horizons? Have you tried yet, or has that found its way into when you come back to your music? Or is it a little bit too complex to get you? Not too complex, but too daunting. You know, do they not come together in your work in that way?
I'd say I don't think, you know, I love it and I appreciate it, but I wouldn't want to bring it into my work. I wouldn't want to ape it in a certain way. And I'm not John McLaughlin who's going to go over and do a Shakti thing, you know. It's a different thing
I've
for
got a
me. I
copy of
think.
that, actually. Got a copy of that,
Oh,
actually.
amazing, you know, amazing
Amazing
music,
records, yeah.
amazing music. So absolutely. Yeah, and then you know, another connection. Then I mean, there's always connections everywhere. But so Nguyen Le, who played guitar in this new Cymultystion, I mean, he's played with everybody, but he played a lot with Zakir Hussain. So he's the new Shakti that's come out as in memory of Zakir Hussain.
Mm.
There's a picture of Nguyen in there, and a you know, a passage about him. So you know, when you play with these guys, you're literally one step away from your heroes almost all the
Yeah,
time. You know, Melvin had
yeah,
played with Ornette Coleman, he played with all sorts of people. So just to share a stage with people like that is
yeah.
phenomenal. And Vishal, the tabla player in Chimera, his mum used to dance for Zakir Hussain. They worked together, you know, so he was deeply enmeshed in that scene, and he had stories of hanging out with Wayne Shorter in San Francisco and all sorts of stuff, you know. So all of that stuff, you're a bit of a fanboy, you know. It is you
Yeah, of
essentially
course.
become like, oh my god, that's amazing. So you know, back to the Indian thing, I wouldn't want to. It wouldn't be my style to kind of
Yeah.
impose that, and it wouldn't be natural to me, and I wouldn't want to pretend to be in a position to do it. If
Yeah,
that makes
sure, sure.
sense, you know, I'm nowhere
No,
near
but
that. I'm nowhere near that, and it would be phony, you know. Back to JD
yeah,
Challenger, you know, everybody's a
yeah,
phony and catching their eye, you know, that
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
stays with you after a while.
It does, it does. Yeah, yeah, you hang a lot on that line. But
Yeah,
so
yeah.
we've talked a lot about you know, international connections and all that work you've done. Um, stretches all around the world. You know, that those some of the lessons you learned to just go and ask. As brought music, you've brought musicians from all around the world, and you've been around the world doing these things. What is your evaluation of where I don't know, do I want to say the jazz scene in Wales is at the moment? I think that 10 years ago, there seemed to be a lot more going on. Nowadays,
Oh,
if
no,
I'm not saying that's true. I'm saying,
yeah.
from my perspective of not somebody who went, every week to a jazz gig in Wales,
Mm,
but seeing like posters and flyers and stuff,
mm,
maybe. I mean, I live in Monmouth there, where the Queen's Head obviously had a really
yeah,
quite famous,
yeah,
was it a Wednesday night once a
yeah,
month jazz club thing, and that's closed down, and
yeah.
so maybe just conversations, reverberate from that kind of local experience.
Mm.
But is it how, and of course Brecon Jazz being a very different beast now, to what it was. It's I mean, I don't even know, is it happening this year? It happened last year,
Yeah,
didn't
yeah,
it? Or
I'm
and it's
playing in it
happening
this
this
year
year.
for the first time
Oh,
from
great. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, but yeah, no, I completely agree. The problem is venue, places to play.
Right.
There's still loads of musicians around, but the Jazz Cafe in Cardiff closed just before COVID or during
Yeah.
COVID. Like I say, Monmouth is a massive loss because that was a great. It's not of anybody's fault. The landlord just was leaving, and somebody else bought the pub, and they didn't want to carry on with the jazz. You
Mm,
have to have commitment from somebody. Somebody has to have an interest to make these things happen. It's not easy. But yeah, we're running out of venues. There's there's nowhere to play that'll pay. You've got a great venue in the college, the Dora Stoutsker Hall, but that's kind of high end stuff, and if that you can play there maybe once a year, once every 2 years, because it's there's so much demand for concerts in there, and you've got to have something special if you like to play in there,
mm.
because it's an amazing room, and they program international artists, so that you can't say that that supports the scene because that's not its role. It's a high end venue. But then you've got the Flute and Tankard, but that's Tuesday and Wednesday, and that's just door take. Well, I'm too old to play door take gigs by now. None of my band won't come out for door take gigs. It's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
we've done that. So there's a problem with venues for sure. But I mean, as an aside, a bunch of us came together, jazz musicians, to try and set up a body because Welsh Jazz Society folded years ago, so-called Jazz Explorers Cymru. So I'm the chair of that.
Oh, so
To
that's established. That's happening.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're in the process of being made into a body now,
Oh,
but
great.
we've had funding to do some scoping studies, and actually, I've been working with Deborah Kaiser and T Care, so we're going to go to Jazz Ahead this year for the first time and
Hmm.
represent Welsh jazz. That's like a trade fair, it's the equivalent of Womex or South by Southwest or whatever, but for the jazz world. So that's really good in the sense that at least we can be in Europe and saying, well, we've got Welsh jazz, we've got Welsh jazz musicians, we can promote players, even if it's not to bring people into Wales, even if we can export some of our players, and bands. So that's a positive development to try
Yeah,
and
hugely
raise the
positive.
profile of
Yeah.
Welsh jazz on that. About this. My argument was, there's nobody ever in the room talking about Welsh jazz. You can talk about world music, they talk about this, that, but there's never anybody speaking up for Welsh jazz. So with Jazz Explorers Cymru, hopefully we'll at least be in the room and be able to say, well, we've got these great figures. I mean, Hugh Warren is still playing amazing, incredible music. Paula Gardner is still out there. So yeah, and there's a lot of youngsters. Ursula Harrison, Paula's daughter, just won, Young Jazz Musician of the Year last year. So there's lots coming through. There's plenty happening. It's just about places to play, places for people to
Mm.
see people play. That's the problem. And I think that's the perspective of the scene isn't what it was because there isn't the places to play anymore, and that's absolutely that's true. It's quite devastating in a way. We need some better venues. We need some. Well,
What do you
but
see?
habits have changed. People don't go out. The whole thing's changed, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, all sort of artistic formats of feeling it all,
Mm.
theatre rock music, all of those venues are constantly fighting the good fight to stay
Mm,
open and open new
yeah.
venues. And yeah, so in that sense, jazz is suffering just like everybody else. Do you see? I mean, is there an answer to that? What is there? I mean, a lot of what sort of mainstream pop and rock music has done over the years with the struggle for musicians and artists to earn a living is that they've kind of restructured the way that live music happens, right? It's
Mm,
become huge events. So, Cardiff, the summer Blackweir gigs,
mm,
sort of these huge event. It's not about going to, Thursday night, who's playing? It's like,
mm.
I've booked tickets for
Yeah,
2028 to see the
yeah.
Cure, whatever. But also the smaller acts seem to be all coming together, and now there's, pick and choose your festival every weekend from April till September.
Yeah, but again, I mean, my argument is, I'm not sure that that helps the local scene at all. Even festivals is kind of a false economy. It's a festival
Mm.
economy, and
Yeah.
people will go to festivals not for the music. Almost, there's no inquisitive. The audience isn't inquisitive anymore, in the sense of, oh yeah, let's go to this venue. We trust the programmer. We know it's going to be good because it's on. I think that died about 25 years ago, and that's what some of those things are the killer, where you just go to the venue because you go there and you know it's going to be good because the music is good. These massive events, it's just, well, I could go on and be really down about it, but it's just capitalism. It's just big,
Yeah.
everybody's got loads of choice, but there's no choice. Everybody has to do the same thing. And the way they talk about music now is, Taylor Swift comes to play the stadium and they're like, oh, well, one day you'll play the stadium. Well, no, the reality is nobody, when you two play the stadium, at no point do you think, oh, I'm going to be playing the stadium one day. That's insane. Nobody gets to,
Yeah.
that's like that's not reality. The reality is the gigs that just happen, and if you're lucky, you'll play in a nice theater once in a while.
Mm.
And I find that kind of narrative really kind of weird. And even the Cardiff Music City thing is all about that, it seems, big venues, big. It's not about the big venues. It's about the norm, the people finding themselves, having an opportunity to play, to then find themselves. So by the time you're 25, you might know what you want to do. I don't know where people can play to discover what they like and what they don't like. And I think that's true of audiences. Where do audiences go to find out what they like and don't like? But that's super negative bullshit. Sorry about that.
It's not super negative though, is it? Because if we don't have conversations on about this, which I honestly think is the majority opinion, you know,
Mm,
most people I know don't go to the big gigs in Cardiff, right? The big Blackweir
mm,
gigs. I know quite a few people are going to see the Cure,
mm,
um, but a lot of those gigs won't even sell out, or
mm.
the tickets will be bought by people who are just going to spend
Bladdered.
£10 on a plastic cup of Strongbow and
Yeah.
get absolutely hammered. They won't. I know so many people who went to see Stevie Wonder last year and couldn't tell me much about the gig. They were just there for a big party.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's what these big events are. They're big events, so people go to go.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
there. I was there. How many thousands of tickets? Yeah, I was one of those thousands of people.
Well, I always used to think people would say, "Oh, I saw. I can't wait to go to Glastonbury this year. So and so's there." Well, of course they are. They have 4,000 bands on every year. Everyone's at Glastonbury. What's the big special thing that you're going to see? This band at Glastonbury.
Yeah,
Every band who is alive is at Glastonbury every year. If they're touring, they're going to do Glastonbury. If
yeah,
they're together and they're not
yeah,
dead, they'll be at
yeah.
Glastonbury because
And
Glastonbury is a. What's
most of them
what's so
don't get
special
paid
about it?
either. Most of
No,
them don't get
exactly.
paid.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
Yeah, no, there's something wrong in the live music ecosystem, I think. But it's money that's needed in a sense to make it viable, but money in the right places,
Mm.
sustainable money, long-term investments on a small scale would make a massive difference rather than splurging on big events once in a while almost. If they could just support a venue, get a good sound system, get a good sound man, get some nice gear in there, and just have some gigs on regularly.
Yeah. And
you know,
just
and,
have some bands in that
and
people
just let
don't need to
bands.
know who they are.
Yeah, you could have
It
a
just needs
different
to be a place
genre,
you go.
you could have a different genre from Wednesday to Saturday, and you can have an open mic on a Sunday, a jam session on a Monday, and, there's ways around making it work, I'm sure, but some of these venues in town are really working really hard, and they're really doing their best to keep music
Yeah.
alive, but so many of the neutral venues, if you like, have just, why are they gonna get bands in when they just plug an iPhone on, and put a playlist on? That's what they do. So even that scene of seeing a live covers band has kind of disappeared. So, and then when people actually hear live bands, they're amazed at how they feel,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
how amazing it is.
To feel the music go through,
Yeah,
not through a
just to
sound
see
system.
just to see people playing a song that they know, even a covers band, if they're there doing
Yeah.
it, there is something about music that you can't, yeah, that's beyond beyond the realm of expressing it in language, isn't it? And I'm a big believer in that music has this effect on people, and it'll make people happier. It'll make people enjoy their life in a different way. It'll open their life up to different influences, make you feel differently. But people are that part of their body is just shut up. It's just locked away. They don't get to access it because you're not going to get that from streaming music or 30 seconds of music here and there. You've got to engage with it in some kind of way.
It's a perfect way to end.
I was going to say that's a bit of a downer. We were having a good conversation. Sorry,
It's
man.
an uplifting ending. It's difficult to finish on an upbeat. It is, you want to just, this.
Yeah, no, there's got to be an uplifting ending. Yeah, no. So you just got to keep at it and fight the good fight. It's gonna.
Well, yeah, music will.
Come
I mean,
round.
with this, the in inverted commas, the state of the world at the moment, the conversation about creativity and, oh well, great art is always created when the world is going to shit. So I suppose maybe there's the uplifting ending we were looking for.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if that's so, there's going to be a lot of great art over the next few years.
An open mic with an audience of one. You are an abandoned bike rusting in the rain. You are a crowded train.